Welcome to episode 12 of It's About Data, the podcast about data, analytics, AI, and whatever we feel like talking about. Your hosts are Tony Baer of DB Insights and Matt Housley of Halfpipe Systems. This episode, we're joined by guest Ryan Boyd, co-founder of MotherDuck, to discuss the recent release of DuckLake by the DuckDB Foundation. So Ryan, welcome. You're one of the co-founders of MotherDuck, and that means that you exist in this very exciting data lake, data like new generation data warehouse space. That also puts you in this like complex relationship with open source, where you rely on open source, but you're selling a product that people have to pay money for. And to kick off the conversation here, I want to talk about one of the central tensions that I see in open source that we kind of have a hard time talking about. And that is everyone talks about the need for innovation and the ability to modify code and the ability to customize things and the ability to develop new standards. But when someone actually forks something or someone actually creates a new standard, people kind of get upset sometimes. And part of the context here is the introduction of DuckLake. And so on the one hand, I was excited to see this new standard because it is innovative. On the other hand, Iceberg is emerging as an industry standard. And so I think some people are probably not too happy to see a brand new standard coming out.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's always that tension, right? And I think what I believe is let's just keep on seeing the innovation, and what innovation is built that is useful will stick. And if it is not useful, it won't stick. And, we've seen many evolutions of this throughout our industry. And we'll continue to see that. And I believe DuckLake has a number of innovations that are really important for customers of folks like MotherDuck, for the wider data industry. But time will tell, and see what folks adopt it, what folks get excited about it. And I'm not here to criticize any technology. I don't really believe in the format wars and things like that. I'm all for let's be one big great community who works together to solve problems and make it easier for all of us to go home earlier in the evening and play with our kids. It's not, at the end of the day in my life, it's not really about the technology. It's about life, and if we can make life better, then let's do it.
But for the moment, let's talk about just just to put context here. What is this platform? What is this technology, and how does it really differ from what seems to be kind of kind of the steamroller towards Apache Iceberg?
Yeah, so I mean, let's make a few things clear here. First is that DuckDB and DuckLake are both created by co-creators Hannes and Mark. You can watch a great video on DuckLake. It's a little long, but there's a lot of details there in terms of the evolution of DuckDB and DuckLake, and learn more about that. From the MotherDuck standpoint, basically, we exist to bring this technology into the cloud and make a cloud data warehouse, lake house, you might use it for within the DuckLake world, that really brings two things: internal analytics and BI, as well as application customer facing analytics for our customers. And so we do have a relationship with DuckDB Labs. They are shareholders in MotherDuck, and we pay them consulting or contracting dollars, but we are separate organizations. So it's really the DuckDB Labs folks and Hannes and Mark that are proposing DuckLake, but we're fully behind it. We support it, and the reasons behind that are we think it makes things better. We think it makes things a little bit more ergonomic. It's not about how do we battle between these different formats. It's about what are those improvements that are happening. And DuckLake takes a number of improvements on top of the existing open standards around Iceberg and Delta Lake, and brings those things like simplicity. Instead of having a lot of your metadata sitting on the blob store, it actually brings the metadata into a traditional database, which is actually very good at handling metadata. Metadata being, 1/100th of thousandth of the size of your data traditionally. A very simple, lightweight database, something like Postgres, even, works great for storing that. And that improves scalability, improves the performance, and really is kind of taking the next evolution of these other formats. Where, with Iceberg, for instance, the initial versions of it did not have high performance on writing in many ways, because you had to write multiple layers of Avro metadata files for each write to a Parquet file. And it takes that and says, okay, well, let's just make that a little bit better. So it's building on top of the innovations that have already happened. It's not about replacing them necessarily.
Interesting. Let me ask you this. I want to kind of talk about some more general topics, like the relationship between commercial companies and open source, and the relationship between commercial companies and standards. And I think we've seen some tensions there. And of course, these are probably tensions that you deal with on a daily basis, as you're negotiating all these things. How do we as a community make sure that we have strong support for standards from commercial vendors, but that the vendors don't totally take control of those standards and steer them just for their purposes away from the community's purposes?
I mean, so standards exist for interoperability is primarily why they're there, right? And you could say on the commercial side, it exists in a way for category creation, and you can, bring some other terminology in there. But, from a technologist perspective, it's really about interoperability, ensuring that a bunch of, different technologies work together. And, that is, for instance, the prime benefit of things like Parquet, right? Like Parquet only exists because it is an interoperable file format that works with a lot of different technologies. So, when companies back these open standards and or create them, they're doing it for their own purpose, which is, acknowledging that those standards will only exist and only do well if they are supported by a wide variety of technologies. And that in itself kind of creates this balance that's necessary for, to kind of, I don't know, stem the tide of the commercialism or whatever you want to call it, right? Because they need the community to support them in order for the standard to be valuable. And so, the way that traditionally folks have, commercial companies have made these standards, for the community has been donating them back to things like Delta Lake with the Linux Foundation, or Iceberg with Apache Software Foundation. These foundations exist to put barriers that prevent the commercial interests from taking over. But I don't know that it's even actually necessary, because in many ways the commercial interest is that the open standard exists and thrives, because that's what enables the interoperability. So there's like everything in life, it's all about a system of incentives and how those incentives interoperate. And I think for the most part, we've seen good players out there.
So that leads me to ask, could what you're proposing at the metadata layer, because that seems to be really the real differentiator versus what's happening, say in an Iceberg or Delta at this point, could this actually end up being contributed as part of either project? We'll say, I'll probably say more Iceberg than Delta, because I think Delta is right now in a long-term process of merging into Iceberg. But do you see this as possibly, have you folks thought about approaching the Iceberg community, the Apache Iceberg community, and proposing this as a contribution?
So first of all, to correct, like the work that's been done thus far on DuckLake and been released thus far is not from Mother Duck, right? So
Okay.
I'm here representing Mother Duck, but we will implement DuckLake as a back end. for basically the metadata, the catalog for DuckLake with MotherDuck. But it is work that's done by others. The Could it be given back to Iceberg or something? I think that what you see with Iceberg, is really that a lot of the Iceberg standard is actually around the metadata. So it is an improvement upon the philosophy that they're doing, which is transactional work on top of Parquet files in blob storage, right? It's an improvement on that. But I don't think that it can really be supplemented because it is kind of a replacement of what is happening on the metadata layer, right? So a lot of the work that's being done in Iceberg, basically what the DuckDB Labs folks noticed, what Hannes and Mark noticed is, hey, everyone that wants to seriously implement Iceberg or Delta Lake needs a catalog server. And those catalog servers, in most cases are not open source. In most cases, those catalog servers are proprietary. And the idea is Duck Lake really adds that catalog server as part of the core open standard, and does it using a database, a traditional SQL database that has all the transactional capabilities of a traditional SQL database. So that's one key difference. The other key difference I would say is that Duck Lake, takes the philosophy that DuckDB has, which is that multiple tables are important, that multiple tables don't exist in isolation from each other, which is kind of the traditional way of handling things in Parquet and Iceberg and Delta, is that it's on a per table level. Whereas Duck Lake takes the idea of, no, you have many tables and those tables have to interrelate with each other. So there's a philosophical difference there that I think is just, hey, this is relational in the end. We do have multiple tables. Those tables have to evolve together. The schema evolution has to happen in one atomic transaction across dozens or hundreds of different tables. You can't do that in a format that really thinks of things just as on a table by table basis.
Yeah, and it's funny because as I was reading this description and then from the DuckDB Foundation and Jordan's post about Duck Lake, they're definitely uncovering some issues that I've seen in Iceberg for a long time, which is if you put all the metadata in S3, it takes a while to get to it, right? And another common complaint is that to get metadata on Parquet files, you have to read all these headers off of Parquet files, which again takes a long time. I'm a bit curious from the technology standpoint. My assumption always was that to make this work well, individual vendors probably have to implement some kind of caching of metadata so that they can, just like you're saying, right, look things up quickly, get the full catalog of tables, say, okay, over here we can serve this query just from metadata using the count we have or using the very different data in the rows, knowing what possible values can occur in those rows. What is MotherDuck doing in that regard? Because I assume that you have kind of a similar issue that you have with other data systems where you probably take the base DuckDB source code and then add on some extra things like these caching layers and things. So what has been MotherDuck's approach to caching in that respect?
So a lot of the caching that we do, so to date, we've supported traditional DuckDB. We are going to launch our Duck Lake support in the very near future. We actually have, I think next week, we have an interview between Hannes and Jordan that we're doing, so discussing some of that. But to date, we have actually tried not to fork DuckDB in any way. So, most of the innovation that's happened with MotherDuck has gone back into the core DuckDB open source project, through work by Hannes and Mark, and their team. I shouldn't just keep on referencing them. It is a wide team. But a lot of that work has gone back into DuckDB through things like improved concurrency and things like that are necessary for MotherDuck to operate as a service. We do have caching. A lot of our caching is actually at the operating system level, and ensuring that if you do interact with Iceberg files and all from MotherDuck, that we are able to access them performantly. To be honest, we have focused mostly on being a more classical data warehouse than we have
Yeah.
focused on our Iceberg support to date. And we do have a bunch of metadata layer caching and such there, that is understanding where things are in which DuckDB files, essentially. And we have our own file system that we've talked about. There's some blog posts that go into pretty in depth into that file system that we use for DuckDB files, essentially. But I see us doing, a lot more of that kind of going forward, and based off of, DuckLake as we launch DuckLake support, embracing the work that Hannes and Mark have done in creating it, and probably extending it here and there, but working with that team to do so.
Okay. I have one last question. It's really looking at the competitive dynamics here. Is that how do we really avoid basically a situation of basically perfect being the enemy of good? Or that, because the thing is, it could be argued that, as he's mentioned before, Brian, which is that there for many use cases, talking off camera, warehouse is perfectly fine. We don't all need a lake or a lake house. And it could be argued that in a lake house, do we really need to have that same degree of operational efficiency when maybe good will, basically like let's say an 80% solution will be good enough. So sort of a dual sort of a double-edged question, or double-edged sword I'm going to throw at you is one, how do we avoid, basically a perfect being the enemy of good? And the other part, more from the competitive dynamics, given just the incredible momentum of Apache Iceberg at this point, in terms of whether the community really has, or the market really has the appetite for another battle in an area that's basically just a table format. Let's just guess this darn thing settled. How do we avoid this ending up being a beta versus VHS situation? And boy, there I am revealing my age.
Oh, I remember the beta versus VHS.
So I mean, I do too. I do too.
Yeah, no, I mean, all right. So, beta versus VHS was, the worst format won out because of adoption in many ways, right?
Yes.
I hope we don't end up there, simply because that is, as an industry, I like to take pride in the momentum that we build and the improvements that we build in the industry. And so hopefully the worst one doesn't win out. I think that, Iceberg, Delta, DuckLake, we're all building on top of things like Parquet. It's all the philosophy is still the same, right? The philosophy is you have a table format that is fairly efficient, that exists on a blob store, that scales infinitely. That's fantastic, right? So let's keep that for sure. And all of these folks do that, right? The question is how do we handle the metadata? And on the other file formats, the metadata typically is handled as Avro files or JSON metadata files, JSON logs of transactions or snapshots in Iceberg sense. And I think that what is the more efficient way, what is the more elegant way, is what I hope wins. And at least right now, I'm believing that is the work that DuckLake is doing. Is more elegant, is more better suited for developers. Honestly, the what they're doing from an Iceberg standpoint, where the ecosystem has to build catalog servers around it, and those catalog servers are often commercial and not part of the open standards. I don't know. I guess I kind of view that as actually, you're not getting the full thing when you're getting Iceberg or Delta. You only have the full thing once you have the catalog servers and other things, parts of the ecosystem around it. And so in this way, I do think it is an improvement. And it is also an improvement for the open world. But like I said, I don't like attacking any of these formats. I think these are just incremental improvements. I think that if the Iceberg folks and the Delta folks realized how important the catalog server was from day one, they would have built into the open standard just the same as DuckLake did. But this is an evolution, and as long as that evolution is headed in the right direction, unlike the beta versus VHS, I'm a happy man. I think the community is a happy community, and but time will tell in terms of adoption. I will say one other thing though is that to reiterate that it's not a table format with DuckLake. DuckLake is a lakehouse format, right? It is the idea of tables actually should interoperate with each other and provide a lot of value for each other. Whereas, Iceberg, Delta, Parquet all think of them as these isolated entities.
Well, it's funny with the big data movement and Hadoop, and then before that GFS, we kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater, right? It's like, oh, we don't need schemas, we don't need indexes, and it's funny that we're gradually rebuilding all of these components.
I mean, they even joke in the kind of intro video there, Hannes and Mark, about DuckLake, how DuckLake is really just implementing the same thing that Google did with BigQuery, and how Snowflake, what Snowflake does, and what a lot of traditional data warehouses have done, which is the metadata is in a database.
Yes.
It's kind of re-implementing that, and but it allows us to get back to doing things like high performant updates, inlining, they call it in DuckLake, where you can actually load data row by row in DuckLake in an efficient way because it stores those rows in the metadata server instead of immediately storing them in Parquet files. It allows all sorts of things like that. So we'll see how these are used, right? These are things that have been asked for by the community. And we've seen concerns about that when working with the other formats. So we'll see if the community then picks them up and uses them.
Yeah, it's funny. A couple of years back, I gave a talk at Data Council about how to beat the CAP theorem. And the answer is that you use more than one database, right? You're kind of doing the same thing. So maybe that'll be another episode one of these days talking about how you hybridize columnar and row-oriented systems like transaction-based systems, which is what you're doing. But we won't dig into all that today.
And the battle of the catalogs.
Yeah, maybe that's going to be the next thing. It'll be interesting to revisit this conversation, say, in a year after the dust has settled a bit, and to say, okay, do we have like iceberg hegemony, or are we diverging into new standards? Is there a lot of adoption of new standards?
We've come up with a new metaphor: dust on the duck.
Dust on the duck.
Don't encourage him. They've got way too many duck wordplays, including off-color ones. So.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Tony, for having me. It's a great conversation.
Good talking.
We'll try to turn this around quickly. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, cool.